Street Fighter 2 had taken the gaming world by storm in the early 1990s and had become the definition and world leader of the fighting game genre, so much so that it inspired several competitors to come into the genre and create their own takes, like Mortal Kombat, Fatal Fury, Virtual Fighter, and Tekken to name a few. By 1994, Street Fighter had already established itself as a legendary franchise in the world of gaming, from Street Fighter 2 to its follow-ups, Champion Edition, Turbo Edition, Super Edition, and Super Turbo. Each subsequent version introduced tweaked gameplay mechanics, speed, animations, and of course new characters, with Super Turbo having a grand total of 17 characters, including the debuting Akuma. You would have thought why this wasn't Street Fighter 3, but as was Capcom's way, especially back in the 1990s, they just had to release updated versions of the same game. As great as Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo was, as the final installment of the Street Fighter 2 series, when was Street Fighter 3 going to come out and make an appearance? Well, as it turns out, not for a few more years, and after a new iteration of the Street Fighter series. Street Fighter Alpha made its debut on June 22nd, 1995. It was known in Japan, Asia, South America, and Oceania as Street Fighter Zero. It was the first all-new Street Fighter game produced by Capcom since the release of Street Fighter 2 back in 1991. Plot-wise, it serves as a prequel to Street Fighter 2 and features younger versions of the established characters, as well as characters from the original Street Fighters and Final Fight games. Enter Street Fighter Alpha 2, first released on March 25th, 1996 on arcade cabinets. If Alpha 1 was the preview, Alpha 2 was the main course, and in the eyes of many of the Street Fighter fans, this was the real follow-up to Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Street Fighter Alpha 2 retains most of the new features introduced in Street Fighter Alpha, like the 3-level combo gauge, the alpha counters, the air blocking, and fall breaking. Alpha 2's main new feature is the inclusion of the custom combo system, the original combo in Japan, and this replaces the chain combos from Alpha 1. The roster has also grown in size as all characters from Alpha 1 return, including the 3 hidden characters of Akuma, Dan, and Bison. Fresh from Street Fighter 2 series, Dhalsim and Zangief make their return. Rolento, a character from the Mad Gear Gang in the Final Fight game, makes his debut here. Jen from the very first Street Fighter makes his proper one-on-one fighting game appearance, and there's also a newcomer, Schoolgirl Sakura, who idolizes Ryu as seen in her move repertoire. A total of 18 characters for the Alpha 2 roster, then a further 2 additions with Evil Ryu and Shin Akuma, superpowered versions of the characters, as they both absorb the dark power of the Satsuine Hado. Street Fighter 3 finally came along in 1997 with an all-new roster. Ken and Ryu, the only survivors from the previous Street Fighter 2 games. Then as Capcom, as they usually do, released 2 more versions of this game in Street Fighter 3 Second Impact and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. The art style and gameplay mechanics were unlike previous Street Fighter games, and they weren't quite the immediate hit with fans who had been used to the Street Fighter 2 and the Alpha series. Street Fighter 3 was not widely popular during its initial run. It would, however, grow in popularity over time, and with no imminent Street Fighter releases, it had plenty of room to breathe and become a legendary fighting game in its own right, and became a great addition to the Street Fighter franchise. If Street Fighter 2 is the granddaddy of all fighting games, Street Fighter 4 is the master of all modern day fighting games. July 18th, 2008 will go down in history as the date that revived not only by that point a legendary fighting game series, but an entire video game genre, the fighting games. The gaming world at large was indeed ready for a new Street Fighter game. Now, I personally had heard rumblings of a Street Fighter 4 game from social media and various gaming news sites, and then I saw the pictures and then the videos of the arcade version, and I was immediately excited and said, it's about time. Given my history playing this, I was already familiar with the basic movesets, but what took me by surprise was the 3D animated style in a 2D environment. It really added to the experience of playing Street Fighter in this cel-shaded 3D environment, but sticking to the core gameplay style set by the previous version of Street Fighter games. It also added a new feature called the Focus Attack, players to absorb an attack and then launch a counter attack. The Super Combo meter system was also enhanced here. You had the Super meter which built as you continue to get all those hits in and then pull off a Super Combo. Then you had the
Ultra Meter system, which was filled as your character's energy got depleted, and then you could pull off another super move as a way to defend yourself, and more often than not, snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Street Fighter 4 seemed to reinvigorate the beat-em-up genre, and when it launched in 2008, Street Fighter 2 inspired its rivals and alternatives like King of Fighters and Mortal Kombat, Killer Instinct and others to enter the frame with all their historical libraries, and now, with Street Fighter 4 coming out, there was a renaissance in fighting games, with the aforementioned titles creating new games and adding to their already vast libraries. Once again showing how influential Street Fighter was, and still is to this day, within the gaming industry. Street Fighter 4 made its impact and added to the franchise's incredible legacy, with classic characters and newbies all brought together for one massive fighter fest, with a gameplay style that enhanced the experience all round. Whilst it might not have quite reached the heights of Street Fighter 2 in terms of overall sales and popularity, it cannot be denied that this game brought the franchise to a whole new level, and in terms of look and feel, I think it has surpassed its predecessors, but this is just my opinion. A game that will live on for years to come. The master of the modern day fighting games, Street Fighter 4. Street Fighter 5, a game that has a very interesting rise to glory, starting out as a game that was far from finished with a minuscule roster to an excellent fighting game that has become very popular with the online fighting game community, with, to date, the biggest roster in Street Fighter history. Now, unlike 4, Street Fighter 5 was going to be a console exclusive to the PlayStation. Given a large chunk of my enjoyment of Street Fighter 4 came on the Xbox 360, this was something of a letdown. Even though I was at a point in my life where I could just save and get both the 360 and the PlayStation 3, and I did, it was still disappointing to have the game tied up to just one console. Now, it would be a full 14 months before we got the eagerly anticipated release of the game. And sure enough, the game got its full official release on PlayStation 4 on February 16th, 2016. Now, I did not buy it on its initial release. I had read online complaints about how the roster size had just shrunk to 16 characters, and given what I had just experienced from Street Fighter 4, this was a massive letdown. There had been complaints about the gameplay not being as smooth, and certain character designs were ridiculed by fans. The roster included 4 newbies in its initial lineup. Given Street Fighter's rich history, even up until that point, the roster size and the selection was extremely underwhelming and questionable. The game also had a distinct lack of modes, including a basic arcade mode, which was just a big head scratcher. The game was preparing for a full-on cinematic mode entitled A Shadow Falls, which did not get released until July 1st, 2016. February 14th, 2020, Capcom released the latest version update of this game, Street Fighter V Champion Edition. This version had several gameplay and balance changes, as well as each character getting a second V-skill. It also included every stage that had been added up until that point. Almost 4 years since the game's release, and it finally began to feel like a fighting game worthy of the Street Fighter fame and history. Given its predecessor's success, Street Fighter V started out as something of a disappointment. The small roster, the issues with online gameplay, but over time, with all the DLC additions, it has gone on to become a very successful fighting game, holding the record, as I've stated earlier, for the most Street Fighters to feature in a roster. It has become widely popular with the online gaming community that it is a regularly featured game at EVO and other online fighting game tournaments. What started out as poor and underwhelming eventually ended up becoming fun and incredible. Street Fighter V adds to the already massive history of the Street Fighter series, and it has become a very worthy addition. Street Fighter 6 was announced with a trailer showing Ryu and newcomer Luke, which looks interesting, and it appears to be using a different art and animation style. Another trailer was recently released, and we will see just how much that game ends up becoming part of the Street Fighter legacy. Street Fighter 6 has started off with some of the same misgivings that I had about 5, so if history is anything to go by, Street Fighter 6 will get a slew of updates that will increase its playing value and become a very, very well respected fighting game. It's already gotten a lot of rave reviews online, and I will get back into playing it at some stage, and it is going to be a topic for a future video here on Smug Peeps.
up, he improved. A real problem, but I solved